Hello, and welcome back to the Survivor Smite podcast. I'm your host, and I'm so glad that we are on episode 10. Goodness me, this is 10 weeks of doing the same thing over and over again, and I'm excited about it. And this is an episode that sets the tone now of where we are headed. And so, as a survivor of childhood abuse myself, I've learned over the years that it almost feels like it's stuck on your skin, right? So the more you grow up and you anticipate and you're looking forward to be free, you find yourself in situations, right, where you see like the telltale signs of abuse, on the way. Or sometimes you actually become a victim again, in relationships, in workplaces. We need a whole episode, if not a series, of the abuse that happens in our workplaces, right? I call it, professional abuse, right? You would find yourself even being abused as a grown up, with family members, especially in the context of extended families. And I'm going to do another whole episode of what extended families entails, especially if they are dysfunctional, right? Because I grew up in one of those. But I just want to set this tone to prepare us for the episodes that will come after this. And we will be focusing on the idea of surviving abuse in whatever context, right? We can pick. Sometimes I'll come in with ideas of my own or the things I've gone through, but also looking into what society entails. And what do I mean by that? When I was still in Africa, because I'm an African girl, brown skinned girl from Zimbabwe. And when I left at 25 years old, I always assumed my life is going to be free. Nobody's going to have power to do anything to me. I'm grown. I'm going into the so called first world or whatever people can call it. And people are open minded and, thoughtful. And I still found myself back again into that space where you literally look at a situation and you're like, hold on, I have been molested just now. Hold on a minute. This has happened to me again, right? I found myself in situations like that where I signed contracts in a language that I don't understand because I'm in Germany, and I've been misused over that, right? Because people just know that you don't even know what your rights are, and even if you did, you're most likely not going to say anything, right? And so it almost feels like it's something stuck up on your skin and it follows you everywhere. I remember calling my dad one time, just complaining over something that would not work out for me, right? I remember calling him and thinking, Dad, am I cursed? Are we cursed people? Why is it nothing is working for me, right? And it almost feels the same when it comes to the issue of abuse. So, as a child, you live in that space and you are struggling with, grown-ups around you who just will not treat you like a child. At least that was my case. And my whole childhood was so much energy coming out of me trying to just communicate that, look at me, I'm just a child like anybody else. But unfortunately for me, I lived in a household where my mother was not in. And I think in most African contexts, if you're African, you would know that the wonderful people we call stepmothers, it's usually not good news, right? And so my whole childhood was a serious, it was war. It was me sleeping at 2 a.m., figuring out what I'm gonna do. Should I kill them or should I kill me? And I'm as young as 6 years old, right? Because my parents were separated when I was 2, and by the time I was 4 years old, I was at grandma's, and by the time I was 6 years old, getting into first grade, I went back to my dad, and I lived with his wife. Right? It was not, anything good at all. And though I look at it today and I would want to say it all had purpose and whatsoever, which is a whole other episode on its own, I would point out that it was not easy, right? I would point out that it took me years to even try to come to peace with it, with events that happened, with things that were said, with beliefs that were installed into me, right? So I'm living in this. And I think one of the biggest things I ended up carrying the more I grew up was this it almost felt like a certain level of bitterness, right? Like to every grown up, to every adult who was around me. And they saw those things happening. They saw me being beaten physically, being abused emotionally, spiritually, everything. And you would not say anything. You clearly saw that and you knew it was wrong, right? Did not choose to do anything. The people who live in our communities who would see us being beaten, this is now my brother and I that I'm giving context to, right? When I said us being beaten, right? Being starved, you are not allowed to eat food. You don't go to school in normal times that normal children go because, unfortunately, again, for me, I was supposed to do house chores before I checked out to go to school. And I'm talking as early as being 6 years old. For those of you who know fufu, and if you are Zimbabwean, cooking sadza, you have grown women who make mistakes on making that meal. I had to be taught by my father how to do it at 6 years old because otherwise my brother and I were going to starve in the household. And even though my brother is older than me, again, it goes back to the interesting things that society teaches. I was the one who was taught how to cook it, even though I was the youngest one, but I was the female, or I am the female, right? And there are these questions that come into your head like, I might try to understand if the fellow children in my household, for example, my step sisters and brothers, because again, it's their time of favor, they did not choose. It's their luck, I guess, if they don't have to stand up and say this is wrong. But I had an issue, and until today I do, of adults who see things like that and they would not raise an alarm to say, look into your household. Because my father would work over the week, he's gone, and he would come back over the weekend. So when he's there over the weekend, that's when we get bath and we look nice. That's where we're allowed to even eat eggs. That's why the first few years I got to Germany, I was eating bacon like I'm a little pig, right? Because I had to keep up with how starved I used to be as a child. We are literally not allowed to eat. I think that honestly, as adults, and this is something that I know for sure I'm going to speak a lot about on this podcast. Why are we not standing out for our children? And by our children, yes, I'm imposing even children you didn't give birth to, they are your children. And why are we in this space of looking at things that are wrong and we choose to pretend like everything is fine? Right? I don't know. I know. I know I'm going to be talking a lot about it because now that I'm a grown up woman, and for years being in Germany, I've also worked in healthcare, right, during the years that I was a student and even until now. And I've gotten to take care of children I don't know. And some of them, to be fair, they can be very rude. Actually, I came to Germany with a program called Au Pair, and I was looking after German children, right? And some of them are rude, some of them you feel like, oh, the African in me is going to come out now. But the honest truth is, I protect children, whether they're mine or not, right? I've worked with children with disabilities. I've worked with children with learning, problems. They will just not learn as fast as anybody else. And even though I've been teaching them, it has also been training me. And there's not a single child I've ever looked at and I haven't seen myself in their shoes, right? Why? Because they were born, or they were put into a situation where they became, unfortunate, and something went wrong with their brain or with their physical body. They did not choose that. And that's the same situation I felt I was in when I was a child, in a household where I feel like I can't go anywhere. I'm just a kid. I'm here. And even if I had pulled up a plan to run away, they would catch me in the first like 30 minutes, right? So that would never even cross your mind. And you feel, the best word to describe that is this helplessness. Like, you cannot do anything. And naturally that's how it is, because it's the adults that are meant to look after children. But what happens to some of us who grew up in abusive households, dysfunctional families, or there's extended family dynamics? You are forced to grow up as early as yesterday, because if you don't, you're gonna starve. You don't know how to make any meal. And if you don't take care of yourself, you're not gonna be able to fight for yourself. And we don't even want to start talking about having a voice, because basically you don't. In a household like that, where your mother is not there, nobody cares. It's even worse, to an extent that I've been looked at in my face and be told, shut up, your mother is not here, we're going to do what we want with you, right? And so for me, when I look at an abuser, right, it almost feels like they have a psychological issue, right? I think or psychology has been trying to prove certain things, like, I don't know, racism and segregation and putting people into classes as a mental issue. And I hope no one is gonna come at me for saying this, but at least, when you look at a grown-up person who is making a little child's life hell, knowing very well that the child is helpless and they're just a child, I think something has to be going on in your mind. Because naturally, we are children are just these little wonderful humans that you know, as soon as we put our glance on them, we are to cherish them, right? And so if you're not like that, especially in the context of then probably marrying, a partner who have their own children already, I think it's so unfair that people get to abuse children like that. Because they look at it and they're like, you chose my parent, knowing very well I existed. Why am I even here? And as children, we don't even think about that, because we are not, our brain as children is not wired to think about that. I ask those questions now in my 30s. But when I was 6 years old, all I knew is, I'm here, this is my dad, this is his wife, and my mother is somewhere, right? And it's heartbreaking. It's disappointing to know that adults come to a place of making certain choices over the fate of children who do not have it in power to do anything at all. I think it's unfair. And Lord have mercy, it happens every day. As I'm speaking right now, somewhere, someone is abusing a child, physically, sexually, mentally, psychologically, however way it can be. And why are we so heartless, right? Maybe if I consider the abuser as someone who is, something is off in their brain, right? How about those around who can see all these situations happening, and we still make a choice to look at the child and look away, and we are okay with that as adults? I think that's the highest level of irresponsibility that we could ever express as grown up people. really my dream, my hope would be that we would love children, wherever they come from, whether they are ours or they are not, or they are our partners, or they are our, close relatives, or they are random. I've taken care of children whom their parents have done or said things to me in this very country. And I'm just sitting there and thinking, Lord, you know me and you know my heart. So I'm going to give it my all, you know? Not because I'm perfect. I think most of it comes from trauma, really. I find myself wanting to be whoever I could have wanted to have when I was a child, right? So as an adult now, when I look at situations, I'm trying to think in the context of how would I help this child? How would I wanted an adult to handle this situation when it was still my time? Because I mean, I did everything to bring myself out of all those situations, not just physically, but it's still work I'm doing, even mentally, right? And for me to even come here and start talking about these things, it's been decades of working, right? And I'm still not there. I'm still working on it. I think the older I'm growing up, the more I'm becoming very emotional, right? When I was younger, it almost felt like I didn't have feelings. I didn't have emotions whatsoever. I think I spoke about it in the previous episode, that even my teachers in school, they would beat me and I would just stand there. No emotion, no crying, no screaming, nothing. What normal children do, right? I'm just there because I had lost, that touch with myself. And the more I'm growing up, I find myself like crying over movies, and I kind of like pinch myself and like, But I've also learned to embrace it because really, truly, I am just this loving person, but I've grown up in situations that were, trying to harden and to toughen me, because you build around yourself your, protection mechanism, right? In German, we call it Selbstschutzmechanismus. And you build that around you to protect yourself, to protect, everything that matters to you. And in most cases, you're just fighting to keep your mental state in check, right? Your goal is to be sane in this life. So I found myself in situations where I'm very disturbed by certain behaviors. I know one of the things that disturb me is people shouting at each other. Ever since I was a kid, I hated it within the household. And even as I came out of it, until today, I battle with whether it's a relationship or friends or at work situations where someone is frustrated and the first thing they think of doing is shouting. It makes my mind go crazy. I cannot handle it. And some arguments have been, oh, you shy away from your situations. But my way of thinking is, if we can't speak right now and the only way to speak is shouting, let's part our ways, right? As brothers and sisters, as lovers, as whatever. And when we get back into our mental state, we get back to trying to talk about it, right? So really, my main thing is, why are we not protecting our children? Why are we shouting at our children? Why are we teaching them this way of living that is not healthy? And I'm talking to the society here, because abusers, they need a whole different conversations on their own, right? It's a whole different conversation. But those who are around, the aunties, the uncles, the neighbors, why are we doing this? And even in some cases, you have neighbors or friends or family members that actually join that abusive trend, to abuse the child.